I wasn't supposed to be on site that often. Naval architects don't usually stand on cold concrete floors watching steel get welded together. We design, we review, we argue with hydrodynamics models and weight distributions. The yard handles the rest, but this one was mine. It was a research vessel, nothing flashy, long endurance, low drag, stable in rough water. The hull form was the entire point. I'd spent months refining it, not just performance, efficiency across varying sea states, subtle curvature changes, a slightly altered bow entry, a smoother transition along the bilge. Small things, the kind that don't look like much on paper, but matter. The first time I saw it in steel, something felt off. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. The lines were clean, exactly as designed. The curvature flowed the way it should, but standing next to it, it didn't feel like something we had built, more like something we had uncovered. I didn't say that out loud. Just walked the length of it, running my hand along the plating, checking for distortions. Everything was within tolerance. Better than most builds, actually. Looks good, the foreman said. Yeah, I said. It did. That was the problem. The first report came from a night shift welder. He didn't make a big deal of it. Just mentioned it in passing. Lights in the water, he said. What kind of lights? Blue. Faint. Probably just reflection. The yard sits right on the water. Lights reflect all the time. Nothing unusual. I didn't think about it again until 2 nights later. I stayed late, reviewing weld sequences, checking alignment measurements. Around midnight, I stepped outside, needed air. The hull sat partially in the water, not launched yet, just supported, the lower sections already submerged. The yard was quiet, no cutting, no grinding, just the sound of water against steel. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was exactly what the welder said, light. A faint blue glow beneath the surface, soft, diffuse, but it didn't behave like reflection. It moved, not with the water, against it. I stepped closer to the edge, looked down along the side of the hull. The glow shifted, then separated. Not one source, several, shapes. I frowned, waited, let my eyes adjust, and slowly they resolved. Humanoid, not clearly, not sharply, but enough. Long arms, narrow torsos, no visible detail beyond the outline. They moved slowly along the submerged portion of the hull, not swimming, tracing, following the curvature. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. Bioluminescence, maybe, some kind of plankton reacting to movement, but there was no movement. The water was still, and the shapes weren't random. They followed the lines, the exact lines I had designed, from the bow curve, down along the hull, pausing at certain transitions, like they were studying it. I stepped back. The shapes stopped, not all at once, one by one. Then slowly, they sank, fading into the dark. I didn't mention it the next day. There's a limit to how much you can say in a place like that without people deciding you shouldn't be there. But the reports kept coming. Different workers, different shifts, same description, blue shapes under the hull. Probably just light distortion, someone said. Water's weird at night. That explanation held for a while until the changes started. Small at first, a measurement off by a few millimeters. Nothing outside tolerance, but in the wrong direction. The curvature near the midsection, slightly deeper than specified. I checked the drawings, checked the fabrication logs. Everything matched. The steel had been cut correctly, placed correctly, but the hull had changed, not drastically, just enough that if you ran your hand along it, you'd feel it. A smoother transition, a more efficient curve. Better. I told myself it was settling. Thermal shift, material stress, but then it happened again. Another section, another subtle adjustment, always along the same lines, the ones the shapes had followed. I started staying later, watching. Not every night, just enough, and every time I saw them, something was different the next day. A line refined, a curve softened, a transition improved, always small, always just enough, like someone was iterating, refining the design, without tools, without touching it, just by being there. I stopped reporting the discrepancies, because they weren't problems, they were improvements, and that bothered me more than anything. The night before the final inspection, I stayed until sunrise. Didn't leave, didn't take my eyes off the hull. Around 2 a.m., they came back, more of them this time, lining the submerged surface, moving slowly along the steel, following every curve, every contour. And for the first time, I noticed something else. I realized what it was doing. It wasn't studying the hull anymore. It was studying me. And for a moment, I had the same feeling I'd had when I first saw the design in steel, that this wasn't something we had created. It was something we had revealed, and now it was finishing itself, using whatever it had available, the hull, the water, and maybe the person who designed it. I went home that morning and pulled the original files, not the finalized version, the early iterations, the ones I had scrapped. I overlaid them, version by version. At first, nothing stood out, just the usual progression, minor adjustments, slight efficiency gains. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I plotted the differences, not the final shape, but the changes between each version, where I had altered curvature, where I had softened transitions, where the hull had improved. A pattern started to emerge, not in the hull itself, in the direction of the changes. They weren't random refinements. They weren't trial and error. They were consistent. Every adjustment I had made was moving the design toward something specific, and I hadn't noticed it because each change was small, justifiable, logical, but together they formed a trajectory. I leaned closer to the screen. Then I overlaid the current hull measurements, the ones taken after the unexplained changes in the yard. They didn't match my final design. They matched the trajectory, further along than I had taken it, as if the process had continued without me. I sat back, hands still on the keyboard. Because that meant one thing. I hadn't designed the hull. I had followed something, and now something else was continuing it. I went back to the yard that night. Didn't tell anyone, didn't check in. I just walked out to the edge, stood where I had stood before, waited. The water was calm again, dark, flat. For a while, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the blue light returned. One shape, then another, then more. They gathered along the hull, not spread out this time, concentrated. Near the bow, where the changes had been most noticeable, I stepped closer, didn't crouch, didn't lean, just watched. They moved differently now, less like they were tracing, more like they were adjusting. Their shapes bent, shifted, not matching the hull, but interacting with it, and slowly, very slowly, I saw it happen. The steel moved, not visibly, not like deformation, but the line changed. The reflection along the surface slid. A curve deepened by a fraction. I swallowed, didn't step back, because I needed to know if this was real, or if I had just convinced myself it was. One of the shapes drifted upward, closer to the surface, closer to me. It stopped just below the waterline, and held there. Then, it shifted. Its outline changed, not randomly, deliberately. I felt it before I understood it. A pressure, not physical, cognitive, like something was aligning with my perspective. Using it. I looked at the hull, and for a moment, I saw it differently. Not as steel, as a form. Incomplete. The curve at the bow wasn't finished. Not according to whatever this was. I found myself tracing it in the air, without thinking. A slight adjustment. A deeper entry, a smoother transition. I didn't move my hand, but the idea was there, clear, precise. The shape below me shifted again, and the reflection on the hull changed with it, matching. I stepped back. The feeling snapped. The hull returned to normal, just steel, just lines. But I already knew. It wasn't reacting to the water. It wasn't reacting to itself. It was reacting to me, to the way I understood it. I went back to the office the next day, opened the design file, and stared at the bow. I didn't touch anything at first, just looked, and slowly, that same feeling returned, not as strong, but enough. I made one change, small, barely measurable, but precise, exactly what I had seen. I ran the simulation. The result came back better, more efficient, cleaner flow, no compromise. I sat there for a long time. Because I knew what that meant. The hull wasn't finished in the yard, and it wasn't finished here. It was being completed, across both, through observation, through interaction, through alignment. And now, I wasn't just watching it. I was part of it again. That night, I didn't go to the yard. I stayed at my desk, made another adjustment, ran it again. Better, again, better. Each change smaller than the last, more precise, like I was converging towards something I hadn't defined, but was beginning to recognize. Around 3 a.m., I stopped because the curve was perfect, not by my standards, by something else. I didn't feel the need to change it anymore, not because I was satisfied, because there was nothing left to improve. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could see the hull in the water. Finished, complete, and beneath it, not because they had left, because they weren't needed anymore. The design had reached its final form, and I had a quiet, unsettling thought. Not that I had finished the hull, but that whatever had started it had finished using me. The vessel launched a week later, no ceremony, no attention, just another hull sliding into the water at first light. I was there, not on the schedule, just standing off to the side, watching. It entered clean, no unexpected roll, no hesitation. The water took it like it belonged there. That was the first thing I noticed. Usually there's a moment, a slight imbalance, a correction as the hull settles into its displacement. This one didn't correct. It arrived already balanced. The crew ran initial checks. Everything came back normal, better than normal. Best numbers we've seen in a while, someone said. I nodded, didn't say anything, because I already knew what the numbers would look like. I stayed until night, didn't tell anyone, just waited. Around midnight, I went back to the edge. The hull sat fully in the water now, dark, still. I watched for the blue light. Nothing, no shapes, no movement, just the reflection of the yard lights along the steel. I waited longer than I had before, an hour, maybe more. Still nothing. I should have felt relieved. Instead, it felt like something had gone quiet too quickly. I stepped closer, looked down along the side. The water was black, opaque, and then, for just a second, I saw it. Not the shapes. A line, faint, running along the hull, exactly where the curve had been finalized. I blinked. It was gone. Just reflection again. I stayed there a while longer. Nothing else happened. No glow, no movement. Eventually I left, told myself that was it, that whatever I had seen, whatever had been happening, was tied to the process. And now that the hull was finished, it was over. For a while, that held. Sea trials came back clean. Performance exceeded projections. Fuel efficiency was better than expected. Handling stable, even in rougher conditions. Everything worked. Too well. I moved on to other projects, different designs, different constraints, but something had changed. I noticed it slowly. I wasn't starting from scratch anymore. Every new hull, no matter the requirements, drifted toward the same ideas, the same curves, subtle. Hard to notice at first, but consistent. I'd catch myself making an adjustment and realize I had made it before. Not consciously, just naturally, like I already knew what worked. I started pulling up old projects, comparing them. The same pattern was there, not identical, but trending, toward the same form. I stopped myself, tried forcing variation, different approaches, different shapes. The results were worse, less efficient, less stable. I'd undo the changes, let the design fall back into place, and the numbers would improve again, every time. That's when it settled in. It hadn't stopped with that hull. It had just moved on, through me. Months later, I got a message from someone on the vessel, not official, just a casual note. "You ever notice how quiet it is at night out here?" I didn't respond right away. They followed up. Not like other ships, no noise along the hull, no movement in the water. I read it twice, then a third time, because I knew what they meant. Most vessels, you hear things, water sliding along the plating, small impacts, shifts in current, even in calm conditions. There's always something. But this one, apparently, had none of that. Just silence. I asked one question. "Ever see anything in the water?" There was a pause before they replied. Then, "No." That's the weird part. I didn't answer after that, because I already understood. They weren't seeing anything, because there was nothing left to correct. The hull wasn't interacting with the water. It was already aligned with it, perfectly. And whatever had been there before, watching, adjusting, refining, didn't need to follow it anymore. It had gotten what it needed. And now, every new design I touched, every line I drew, every curve I adjusted, I could feel it, subtle, guiding, not correcting me anymore, just waiting for me to realize that I wasn't designing anything new. I was continuing something that had already been finished once and was now quietly making sure it stayed that way. I tried to break away from it, not all at once, just small decisions, a different bow profile, sharper entry, less curvature along the forward third. It looked fine on paper, reasonable. I ran the model. The numbers dropped. not dramatically, just enough to justify a revision. So I adjusted, brought it closer to what I knew worked. The numbers improved. I stopped, stared at the screen, because the change I had just made, I hadn't thought through. I hadn't tested alternatives. I just knew where it needed to go, and it was right. That's when I started documenting everything, every iteration, every adjustment, every decision, not just the final design, the process. I wanted to see if I could find the point where it stopped being mine, the point where it started guiding me. At first, nothing stood out. Then I noticed the gaps, moments where changes appeared, without reasoning attached. A line adjusted, a surface smoothed, no note, no justification, just done. I went back further, older projects, same thing, small changes, no explanation, but always in the same direction, toward that same form. I printed everything, laid it out, side by side, and stepped back, not looking at individual hulls, looking at the progression. It wasn't a series of designs, it was one design, approached from different angles, converging, slowly. I stood there for a long time, because that meant it hadn't started with the research vessel. It had been there before, subtle, unnoticed, and I had just been close enough on that one project for it to accelerate. I got a call a few days later, another yard, different client. They wanted a consultation. Unusual behavior during fabrication, they said. I almost didn't go, but I knew what I'd find. The hull wasn't mine. Different specs, different purpose. But when I walked onto the floor, I felt it immediately. Not the structure, the familiarity. I walked along the plating. Didn't need the drawings. I could see it in the lines, small deviations, subtle corrections, not enough for anyone else to question, but enough. Something wrong? The foreman asked. No, I said, and that was true. Nothing was wrong. That was the problem. That night, I stayed again, not by the water this time, inside, standing next to the hull, watching the surface, waiting. Around 1 a.m., the lights flickered slightly, just a dip, then back, and for a moment, I saw it. Not in the water, on the steel, a faint blue outline, humanoid, pressed against the hull, matching its curvature, like it was inside the reflection. It didn't move, just held there, aligned. Then, it shifted, not across the surface, through it, like the steel wasn't a barrier, just a reference. The line beneath it changed, a fraction, better. I didn't step back this time, didn't break the moment. I watched it happen, let it finish, and when it was done, the outline faded, gone. The hull remained, refined. I stayed a while longer. Nothing else appeared, no movement, no sound, just the quiet. I went back to the drawings the next morning, compared them. The change was there, small, perfect, and I realized something I hadn't before. It didn't need me to see it anymore. It didn't need me at all. I was just faster, a way for it to move through the process without waiting for the conditions it used to need. Water, darkness, stillness. Now, it could work anywhere, as long as the shape was there, as long as someone was close enough to understand it even a little. I closed the file, because I knew what would happen next, not just with this hull, with everyone after it. They would keep getting better, more efficient, more stable, closer, not to what we needed, to what it was. And eventually, someone would notice, not the changes, the consistency, across designs, across companies, across oceans, the same lines, the same curves, appearing over and over again, and they'd ask the question I'd been avoiding, not who designed it, but why does every hull look like it's trying to become the same thing? They did notice, just not all at once. It started in reports, comparative analyses between vessels that shouldn't have had anything in common, different firms, different requirements, different operating regions. But when the data was laid side by side, there were overlaps, not obvious ones. Hydrodynamics has limits. Efficiency tends to converge in predictable ways. Everyone knows that, but this was tighter than it should have been. Curves matching within margins too small to be coincidence. Transitions resolving in nearly identical ways across unrelated designs. At first, it was written off as optimization, better software, shared research. But then someone did what I had done. They tracked the changes, not the final hulls, the evolution of them, and they saw it. The same trajectory, across everything. Different starting points, different constraints, same direction. I got called into a meeting a few weeks later. Not formal, just a room with too many screens and not enough explanation. They had pulled a set of models. "Walk us through these," one of them said. I looked at them. I didn't need to read the labels. I could see it. 6 different hulls, 6 different projects, all converging. They didn't say anything else. Just watched me, waiting. For efficiency, I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the answer they were asking for. Why this shape? Another one asked. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't have a version of the truth that would make sense in that room. It works, I said finally. They nodded, but one of them leaned forward. Do you know why it works? I held his gaze, and for a moment, I almost told him about the yard, the water, the shapes, but the words didn't form. Not because I couldn't say them, because they didn't apply anymore. That wasn't where it was happening now. It had moved past that. It's just optimization, I said. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. The meeting ended without resolution, just more analysis, more comparisons, more quiet concern. I left and went back to my office, closed the door, stood there for a minute, because something had changed. Not in the designs, in how they were being seen. For the first time, it wasn't just me noticing, and that meant it would adapt. That night, I didn't stay late. I went home, sat in the dark, didn't turn anything on, just listened, not for sound, for that same subtle alignment. And after a while, I felt it, faint, not coming from a direction, coming from everything, like the environment itself was starting to follow the same rules, not physically, structurally. I stood up slowly, didn't move far, just adjusted my position slightly, and for a brief moment, everything in the room felt correct. Not perfect, but closer. I stepped out of it immediately, because I understood what was happening. It wasn't just influencing designs anymore. It was influencing how things fit together, spaces, objects, movement, the same way it had shaped the hull, the same way it had refined the curves. Now, it was doing it everywhere. Subtle, gradual, enough that no one would notice until it was already established. I went back to work the next day, opened a new project, blank screen, new requirements, new constraints. I didn't touch anything at first, just sat there, because I knew, the moment I started, it would be there, not correcting, not guiding, waiting for me to move in the right direction, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. It didn't matter if I stopped. It didn't matter if I walked away, because it wasn't dependent on me anymore. I was just one of many, and the shape, whatever it was becoming, was already far enough along that it didn't need permission to keep going. I placed my hand on the desk, opened the file, and began. Because the truth was, even knowing all of it, I still wanted to see how close it could get to whatever it had been trying to finish all along. It stopped feeling like work after that, not in the way people usually mean. There were still deadlines, still meetings, still the usual friction of getting anything built, but the actual design, the part that used to take time, collapsed. I'd sit down, open a file, and within minutes, the hull would be there. Not sketched, not explored, arrived. Complete enough that the rest was just confirmation. At first, I told myself I was getting better, more experienced, faster. But it wasn't just speed, it was certainty. There was no hesitation anymore, no alternate paths, no second options to test, just one shape. And every time I tried to push away from it, the resistance wasn't external, it was internal. Like I was deliberately choosing something less correct. I stopped fighting it, not because I agreed with it, because I wanted to see where it ended. That was the part that kept me going, the sense that there was a final version, a complete form, something beyond what I had already seen. And every design brought it closer. Months passed, the industry shifted quietly, no one announced anything, no big change, but the hulls being built started looking more alike. Not identical, but familiar. You could see it in the bow, in the transition along the midsection, in the way the stern sat in the water. Different ships, same logic. People noticed. They just explained it away. Best practice. Converging standards. No one questioned why the convergence felt so specific, except me, because I knew it wasn't finished yet. I could feel the gap, not in any single design, across all of them, like each one carried part of it, and none of them were the whole thing. That's when the request came in, unusual, not from a company, not from a client I recognized, just a set of parameters, no branding, no identifying details, just requirements, long range, minimal drag, extreme stability, nothing new, except for one line, design continuity preferred. I read it twice, then a third time, because I understood exactly what it meant. Not innovation, not variation, continuation. I didn't ask who it was for. I didn't need to. I opened a new file, and this time, I didn't start with constraints. I let it form, completely, no adjustments, no interruptions. For the first time, I didn't try to control it at all, and what came out was different, not in the details, in the completeness. Every line resolved, every transition finished, no gaps, no sense of almost. It wasn't a better version of the previous hulls, it was the version they had all been leading to. I stared at it for a long time, because for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to change anything. Not even slightly. It was done, and that should have been the end. But that's when I noticed something else. The model didn't behave like the others. When I rotated it, the reflections didn't shift normally. They held, just for a fraction longer than they should, then snapped into place. I leaned closer, ran a simulation. The results didn't just come back better. They stabilized. No fluctuation, no variance, perfect consistency, across conditions that should have introduced error. I ran it again. Same result. I sat back, because that meant this wasn't just efficient, it was resolved, in a way I didn't have a term for. That night, I went back to the water, not the yard, just the coast. I stood at the edge, looked out, the surface was calm, and for a long time, nothing happened. Then, very faintly, I saw it, not shapes, not figures, just a line, far out, just beneath the surface, curving. Following a form I recognized instantly, the same one on my screen, the same one I had just finished. I didn't move, didn't step closer, because I understood what I was looking at. It wasn't under the water, it was in it, not reflected, not projected, aligned, and as I stood there, the line shifted, not moving, resolving, becoming clearer, more defined, like it had been waiting for the design to catch up, and now, it had. I closed my eyes, because I knew. This wasn't the end of the process. It was the point where the process stopped needing to hide inside designs and started existing on its own, out there, already complete, and all we had been doing was learning how to recognize it. I stopped opening new files after that, not because I was finished, because there was nothing left to solve. The design sat where I left it, complete, unchanged. I didn't need to revisit it. Every time I thought about it, it was already there. Exactly as it should be, no drift, no doubt. Work kept coming in, requests, consultations, reviews. I declined most of them. The ones I did take, I kept shallow. Corrections only, no new forms. But even then, I could see it creeping in, a suggestion here, a small adjustment there, always the same direction, toward that same shape. I started noticing it outside of work, in places that had nothing to do with ships. A bridge support, the underside of a highway ramp, the way water moved along a canal wall. Not identical, but consistent. Curves resolving the same way. Transitions smoothing in the same pattern, not designed. Arrived at, I avoided the coast, stayed inland as much as I could, but you can't avoid water entirely. Rain, rivers, even reflections in glass. It showed up in all of it, subtle, never enough that anyone else would point it out, but enough that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Months later, I got another message. Same contact as before, no name, no details, just a single line. We've built it. No attachment, no explanation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because I knew what they meant, and I knew what came next. A few days later, I saw it, not in person, on a satellite image. Public data, nothing restricted. A vessel out in open water, no markings, no registry, just there. I zoomed in. The resolution wasn't great, but it didn't need to be. I could see the line, that same curve, perfect, not approximated, exact. I stared at it for a long time, because I expected something, movement, distortion, something unnatural, but there was nothing. It just sat there, in the water, belonging, like it had always been part of it. I checked the surrounding data, wave patterns, wake signatures. There weren't any, not in the way there should have been. The water didn't react to it. It flowed, undisturbed, as if the hull wasn't displacing it, as if the shape had already accounted for every interaction. I leaned back, because that meant it wasn't just aligned, it was integrated. There was no boundary anymore, no distinction between object and environment, just continuity. I closed the image, didn't save it. There wasn't anything to analyze, nothing to improve, nothing to question. The process had ended, not because it was complete, because it had become self-sustaining. And we, the ones who had worked on it, were no longer part of it, just witnesses, or maybe just early steps in something that didn't need steps anymore. I still think about it sometimes. Not the hull, not the water, the moment before it all locked into place, when there was still uncertainty, still room for variation, because that's the part that's gone now. Everything is quieter, more consistent, more correct, and most people won't notice. They'll just assume things have improved, that we've gotten better at what we do, but I know the difference. We didn't get better, we just got close enough to something that was already right and stopped before we realized we weren't the ones making it that way. I thought distance would dull it, time too, that whatever had happened would settle into something I could file away. An odd project, a strange convergence, nothing more. It didn't. It just became quieter, and because of that, easier to miss. I took a consulting job inland for a while, civil work, water flow through spillways, drainage systems, nothing that should have connected back to hull design. The first week was fine. The second, I started seeing it again. Not in the plans, in the outcomes. A channel that had eroded into a cleaner curve than expected. A concrete edge worn smooth in a way that matched something I recognized. No one else noticed. They just called it good performance. But I knew. It wasn't just in the ocean anymore. It was in any system where something moved around something else. Fluid, air, even people. The same logic, the same resolution. I stopped correcting it. That was the shift. Before, I had tried to resist. Then I tried to understand. Now, I just watched, because interfering didn't change anything. If anything, it made it more precise. Like resistance gave it more to work with. I kept that to myself, did my job, signed off on things I would have questioned a year earlier. Everything worked, better than expected. Always. One evening, I stayed late at the site. The spillway was running low flow, water sliding along the surface in a thin, controlled sheet. I stood at the edge, watched the way it moved, and without thinking, I adjusted my stance, just slightly, and there it was, that same feeling. Alignment, not as strong as before, but present. I looked down at the water, and for a moment, I saw it, not a reflection, a pattern. The flow had shifted, not because of anything physical, because of where I was standing. I stepped back. It snapped out of it immediately, returned to normal. I didn't move again, because I understood something new. It wasn't just shaping structures, it was shaping interactions, between things, between surfaces, between observer and system. The hull had just been the first place it became obvious. Now, it was everywhere those conditions existed, and I was still part of it, not because I was designing anymore, because I could recognize it, and recognition was enough. That night, I went home and didn't turn on the lights, sat in the dark, because darkness simplified things, reduced variables, and after a while, I felt it again, faint, like something waiting for me to settle into the right position. I didn't move, didn't give it that, because I don't think it needs much anymore, just a moment, just enough alignment, and it can continue, anywhere, through anything. I still work, still sign off on designs, still move through spaces like anyone else, but I don't stand still for long, and I don't look too closely at how things fit together, because once you do, once you see how consistent it's become, it's hard not to wonder how much of the world around you is still being shaped by us, and how much of it has already settled into something that doesn't need us anymore. I started noticing it in people after that. Not physically, nothing obvious, in the way they moved through spaces. A pause before turning, a step that lined up just a little too cleanly with something around them. Most of the time, it meant nothing, just coincidence, habit. But every now and then, I'd catch it, a moment where someone adjusted their position without realizing it, and everything around them seemed to settle. I'd look away immediately, because that was how it worked. The longer you held it, the more it had to work with. I kept my focus narrow. Tasks, deadlines, simple decisions. Anything that didn't require stepping back and seeing the whole. But the world doesn't stay small. Eventually, you notice things. I was walking through a ferry terminal one afternoon, crowded, busy, people moving in every direction, and in the middle of it, a man stopped, not abruptly, not strangely. He just paused, and for a second, everything around him aligned. The flow of people, the angles of the walls, the reflections in the glass, all of it, clean. Like the noise had dropped out, then it broke. Someone bumped into him. He stepped aside. The moment collapsed. No one noticed. I kept walking, didn't turn around, because I understood what I had just seen. It wasn't isolated. It was happening everywhere. Small, temporary, but consistent, like the system, whatever it was testing positions, checking alignments, using anyone who happened to be close enough to the right place. I stopped going into crowded spaces after that. Too many variables, too many chances for it to form. I kept things controlled, predictable, but even then, it found ways in, a hallway at work, the layout of desks, the way light hit the floor at a certain time of day. All it needed was the right combination, and someone, anyone, standing in it. I started changing things, moving objects slightly, adjusting angles, not enough for anyone else. Just enough to break the possibility. It worked, for a while, then it adapted. The alignments didn't disappear. They shifted, formed in new ways, using the changes, incorporating them. I stopped trying after that, not because I gave up, because I realized something. It wasn't reacting to the environment, it was using it, and the environment was everything. I sit in different places now, never the same chair twice in a row, never the same angle. I don't let myself settle, because the moment I do, the moment everything feels just slightly right, I know I'm close, and that's the part I can't let happen, not again, because I don't think it needs much anymore. Not a hull, not a body of water, just a point, a position, and enough stillness for it to finish whatever it's been building this entire time. I don't know what happens when it does. I don't think anyone does, but I've come close enough to it more than once to understand one thing clearly. It's not trying to be seen. It's trying to be perfectly placed. And once it is, there won't be anything left that doesn't already fit into it.